should be live on YouTube. Yeah. So story is, I am now in my living room, hardwired into my router to make sure that this all goes smoothly, that this all goes well. Problem is that because I don't have my second monitor here, it is going to be a little bit more difficult to keep track of everyone because I don't have everything up on one page. So please be patient with me as I'm trying to get everything up and running. That's why this is taking so long. I want to make sure that everything's working at least better than how it has been. So let me keep the chat open here. Okay. And we want to share screen for Keynote. Okay. Alrighty. Let me just double check that that's live on YouTube. It should be, or at least one hopes it is. Okay. All right. I think we're good. We should be golden. Okay. Yes. Okay. So, good evening, everybody, or as should say, how you doing, you cool cats and kittens? You know, those. I'm never gonna get tired of using Tiger King references in my lectures. Sue me, or don't. I don't have any money. I thought I would take the start of the lecture to answer emails, because a lot of you emailed with similar questions, and I figured I would get through them. You know, just answer them here, because a lot of you emailed me in the past like hour and a half, and it's just easier to answer you all here because you all have some iteration of the same question. So I have like around 6 people that again thought that the due date was 11:59 p.m. That is not the case. It continues to not be the case for the Eichmann and Jerusalem paper. I will accept them, but I will take points off. Fair warning, you know, we've done this before. I'm trying not to be an asshole here, but like, come on, guys. Like, this is, you know, if this were the first time, I'd let it fly, but this is like the second time, okay? And it's not, no. Okay, so I'll accept them, and that's about as nice as I'll be, but like, you will get points off. Now, it's a 5-point assignment. It's not that bad, but just throwing that out there. The second question I got was on the discussion sections, and you know, why papers are graded and discussions aren't. And the reason is because discussion sections, while they're due on a certain time, they don't close on a certain time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the discussion sections at the end of the course and just grade them all at once. Because there's no point in me grading all of them tomorrow and then have, you know, someone trying to catch up, do all the discussion sections from, you know, whenever to whenever, and then I have to go back and regrade all of those again. So it makes a lot more sense for me to just do them when the semester is over. Which is actually a rather nice segue, because end of the semester is rapidly coming up. By my count, we have 4 more lectures. That's it. Which means that this is my not so friendly reminder that now that Unit 3 is done, this is the last lecture in Unit 3. Unit 4, if you haven't started your final, I give you permission to panic. Now is a good time to get started on that if you haven't already. I think without further ado, unless anyone else has any other questions, I'll get started with the Eichmann trial. And I think this is, by and large, the most interesting lecture of the course. I think that's fair to say, and there's a couple of reasons why that is. So I mentioned this briefly, I think when we talked about the Nazis, so 2 weeks ago, before the movies. which is when we talk about the Holocaust, um, I think that pop culture does a really good job. Like, it shocks me to say that, but I feel confident that if you ask anyone in the class what the Holocaust is, by and large, they will be able to tell you. And I think that that's a testament to how well our, pop culture, media, treats the impact and the severity of the Holocaust. Um, so instead, I wanted to teach the Holocaust in a bit of a roundabout way, in a way that is certainly different, and that is by talking about the Eichmann trial, because for lack of a better word, the Eichmann trial is one of those defining moments in the 20th century. It's not a coincidence that they call it the trial of the century. Um, so in order to talk about the Eichmann trial and to discuss the book that all of you allegedly read and not went online to look for summaries of, as you did with Darkness, like these get run through Turnitin. Like I know if you went online and looked for a summary, I know because I'm trying like to be polite, but like I'm not. Please don't treat me like I'm stupid. Like if you're at home and you have the time to read the books, just read. There's what else do you have going on? Netflix, Hulu, read. Like do the work for the class. Anyway, um, for today, Hannah Arendt's book on Eichmann is about this man on what is arguably the worst day of his life. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but this is Eichmann reacting to the news of his sentencing. Now, there's a lot going on here. I think the first thing to talk about is who is this guy and why is he on trial? For what reason is he on trial? Where is he on trial? There's a lot of questions. And what's the sentence here? So a bit of a background on Eichmann. Eichmann is a member of that army of bureaucrats that makes the sort of Nazi experiment, for lack of a better word, possible. From what we've looked at when we talk about people like Hitler, Hitler is not a numbers guy. Hitler is not a quote nitty gritty government details sort of guy. And so, in order to make, for lack of a better word, Nazism function, the Nazis needed an army of these bureaucrats who could do the functions of government, could do all the things that governments need to do. And Eichmann is one such bureaucrat. Eichmann, he joins the Nazi Party in his, I believe, his mid 30s, and he's college dropout. He tries to do a wide variety of things. He tries to get into business. He tries to get into academia. He tries to go back to school and finish his degree. And he fails at everything he does until he joins the Nazi Party. And that detail is important because that is like crucial to this character of Eichmann. This guy who is loyal to the Nazi Party, but not loyal to Nazism. Like when you think foaming around at the mouth Nazi, you don't think Eichmann. This guy is not that, but he's loyal to the party in part because this is the first place where he was able to really succeed and really, I guess, for lack of a better word, make something of himself. And he bounces around a couple of offices in the early days during the Anschluss. Eichmann is Austrian, and because he is part of the Nazi, he, for lack of a better word, hops on the train at the right time. He is almost immediately given, like after a couple months, given this really high-ranking position in charge of the immigration office in Vienna. And if you think back to our class on the Nazis, this is right around the time historically when the policy towards the quote unquote Jewish question was to stimulate self deportation. And we talked a lot about why that was a not only bad in terms of like the human cost, but also ineffective at getting what the Nazis wanted. And he's in charge of the immigration office in Vienna. And as soon as Eichmann walks in, Eichmann, for many, 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 many of his faults, was really good at spotting inefficiencies. And when he walks into the immigration office, he notices something, and he only does one thing in this entire immigration office, which is that he noticed that when people were trying to emigrate, trying to leave the now Nazi-occupied Austria forever, predominantly Jews living in Austria, what they would have to do is they would have to get in one line and get their papers to travel with, then get out of that line and get into a new line to drop off their old documents and to have those, destroyed, eliminated, no longer German citizens. You are now American, Polish, French, what have you. All Eichmann does is that he takes one desk and the other desk and puts them side by side, so that instead of having two queues, there's one long line. And this makes things faster, which is why we know that self-deportation, that policy did not work for a wide variety of reasons. But the fact of the matter is that the very sort of middle management bureaucrats in the Nazi experiment trying to look for silver linings in this failed policy. They look at the immigration office in Frankfurt, oh, the numbers are down. Oh, they look at the immigration office in Berlin, all the numbers are down. They look at the immigration office in Vienna, the numbers are down, but they're not as down as everywhere else. The guy in charge here must be doing something right. Let's promote him. I swear to God, that's literally how it happens. And Eichmann somehow finds himself in the upper echelons of the Nazi hierarchy, not overnight, but almost overnight. But this, of course, he gets promoted because the policy changes. We know that the ghetto system and then the self-deportation system, for what the Nazis are trying to do, were just bad policy. They did not set, in strictly the term, they were bad because they were bad things to do, but they were also bad because they did not set out to complete the goals that the Nazis were trying to do. They were just bad. And so when the policy changed and these immigration offices were no longer super necessary, super integral to the Nazi experiment, Eichmann gets promoted. And Eichmann gets put in charge of a rather simple yet essential cog in the concentration camp system. Eichmann is put in charge of the logistical issue of getting people from point A to point B problem. And for lack of a better word, Eichmann runs the trains. Eichmann is in charge of getting people from point A, German cities, to point B, concentration camps. He is in charge of the transportation issue. And Eichmann's, when we think Eichmann, I want to make this clear. Eichmann never sets foot in a concentration camp. And, important because that's going to come up later. Eichmann doesn't quite know where he's sending these people to. He's working a desk job. Bear in mind, nowadays we do this via computers. But at the time, you needed someone who could manually manage all of the trains for a pretty simple reason. Because if one train's leaving and another train's coming in and the two trains hit each other, right, that's a massive catastrophe. Now we do that all via computers, and we have done for like 30, 40 years now. But back in the day, this was all done manually. This was all done by hand. So the person in charge of like running these trains to make sure that the Germans had these trains available, that they were completely full, as you can see in the picture. So you were maximizing the space, and that they were not sort of hitting or causing accidents with passenger rail. This is a boring job. This is a, if you think about it, an obviously atrocious job, but Eichmann doesn't view it that way. Eichmann's world is one of facts and figures and numbers and statistics and efficiencies and inefficiencies. Eichmann doesn't necessarily look at the morality of it, because in his mind, he's not killing anyone. He's not, he's never set foot in a camp. As if you read Eichmann in Jerusalem, there's a line that Eichmann says, I believe, where he says, "I don't hate the Jews. I love the Jews. I have Jews in my family," which is, rather akin to racists saying, "I'm not racist. I have black friends." But it's important to understand this, because Eichmann doesn't necessarily view himself as part of the problem. Eichmann is in charge of logistics. But as World War II comes to an end, remember what we said, World War II starts when Hitler invades Poland, and rapidly comes to an end as Germany begins to be encircled from all sides. As the Russians win in the east, Normandy happens, and the Allies crush Mussolini and start coming up the south through Italy. And suddenly Germany is surrounded. And you see the latter days of this at the end of Jojo Rabbit, right? When the soldiers are coming in, and the German army is destroyed, essentially. Now, a lot of the German higher-ups, you may have heard of this before, are tried at an event called the Nuremberg trials. The Nuremberg trials are an extension of what we in legal terms call victor's justice, which is essentially the Allies win the war, so the Allies get to decide what justice is in this instance. And there's a lot we could say about Nuremberg. There's I guess from War Take Genocide, either with me or with Dr. Corrigan. But Nuremberg is a fascinating bit of history, because I guess for the first time, really for the first time, you had countries looking at these acts done on a countrywide basis and deciding that a trial is the appropriate way of dealing with this. And there's a lot of discussion in the aftermath of World War II. Stalin, being Stalin, of course, decides to wants to shoot everyone. Says, why are we wasting time with a trial? They're all guilty of sin. Just shoot them all and let's all go home. Not wrong, to be clear, not wrong or a bad sentiment to have, given what we know what the Russians went through during World War II. But of course, Churchill especially is outraged by this idea. The trial is sort of a middle ground, because Churchill wants to free them all. Churchill says, well, they were working for their country. Let's free them all. Stalin wants to kill them all. And so the middle ground being, in this case, first Roosevelt, when they're first beginning to discuss it, and then Truman, they sort of stake this middle ground of, no. Let's put them on trial. Let's see what evidence comes forth, and then the chips will fall where they may. And in Nuremberg, immediately the prosecutor, Ben Ferencz, who is still alive, by the way, and lives here in New Jersey, you can go Google him, Ben, and then his last name, it's Hungarian. It's Frencz. I'll leave it in the chat on YouTube. You guys can see Ben Ferenc. Immediately, the prosecutors at Nuremberg, at least, run into a bit of a problem, which is that the crime of genocide doesn't necessarily exist. What we understand as genocide, legally speaking, is not a term that exists in any legal code at all in 1945. And so when the prosecutors are putting together their case that's going to wrap up in 1950, I think 52, they cannot include terminology surrounding the word genocide in their prosecution. And a lot of this is also by design. You know, the Americans, and at the end of World War II, essentially say, okay, well, look, yes, ideally, in an ideal world, we would like to try them for the crime of genocide, but that's not going to happen. So our choices are, we don't try them at all, or we try them for different crimes, and we end up with the same result, which is their execution or their imprisonment for life. And so that's what they do, essentially. They go for the latter, and they say, look, if the outcome is the same, who cares? And so at Nuremberg, for example, the Nazi hierarchy, everyone except for Hitler, who shoots himself, is and I think also Himmler shoots himself, but I may be wrong on that. The Nazi hierarchies are tried for a wide variety of crimes. Crimes against peace, crimes against war, crimes against humanity, but not genocide. And that's really important, because the legally speaking, the outcome of Nuremberg, the sort of takeaway that you take from Nuremberg is that Germany's crime was not killing millions of Jews. It was killing millions of Jews and then invading Poland. And that if Hitler had never invaded Poland, the summary execution of all of those Jews would have been A-okay. That is, legally speaking, the takeaway from Nuremberg. Now, it's fair to say that in addition to all of the problems at Nuremberg, none of the prosecutors at Nuremberg are Jewish. And I get the feeling that if you had lost mom to the Holocaust, that the language matters. If you had lost mom and dad, or your sister, or you yourself had been in a camp, that language matters. And so the fact that genocide is not tried in Nuremberg is a major sticking point. But of course, not every major Nazi official is tried in Nuremberg. Number one, because the bench only seats, I believe, 27 people. And so 27 people are tried. But a lot of people escape. A lot of people run away. So those of you on the Zoom call, vids and mics on, because it's participation time. And those of you on the YouTube chat, all three of you, my God, participation has gone crap lately. What do you think the term extradition means?
Oh, it's when you legally take someone from another country. Like I can't think of his name right now, but it's been pretty recently pretty common with not Chelsea Manning, the other one.
Assange.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let me give you a pretty practical example of what extradition is. Let's say, during these dark times of coronavirus, you have no money, but more importantly, you have no toilet paper. The spice must flow, though, and so you need to get more toilet paper. And so what do? Well, you hold up your local Rite Aid and just take all the toilet paper from the back, right? You have robbed a Rite Aid for its most precious resource, toilet paper. Now what do? Crime 101. You have committed a crime. Now where do you go?
Home?
Get in your. No, you don't go home. Okay, pop culture time. When O.J. Simpson was in his car on the freeway, where was he driving to? What's up?
Mexico.
Mexico, right? You cross state lines, if not country lines, because if you cross country lines for at least 24 hours, you're safe, right? It's like capture the flag, but in reverse. People in the chat, taking notes of like, okay, step 1, run to Mexico. Step 2, you run to Mexico because the cops in the States have to then call the Mexican police, with which they have an extradition treaty, and say, yo, O.J. Simpson, Corn Pop is a bad dude, come get him and send him back to the States where he can be on trial. That's a Joe Biden reference for those of you who did not get that. Now, a lot of Nazis run away to places where there is no extradition. They do that on purpose. And there's 2 countries in particular where they escape to: Brazil and Argentina. A lot of former Italian fascists and a lot of former German Nazis flee World War II and extradite to Brazil, Argentina, and other countries in South America, because these countries did not recognize extradition with Europe, with any European countries, or with the United States. And, I don't know if you guys are, pay attention to this stuff, but have you ever wondered why there are so many Italians living in Argentina, people with Italian last names, people with German last names somehow living in Brazil? Isn't that weird to you? This is why. It's the dirty little secret that no one wants to talk about, but yeah, this is why. And they all escaped to Argentina, amongst which is Adolf von Eichmann, who has run away and escapes to Argentina. Okay, but that does not explain how Eichmann gets here. Because Eichmann's in Argentina, how does he end up on trial? Isn't he free? Isn't he safe? After all, he's gone to a place with no extradition. Well, here's the story. And this is up there with those stories that are just so crazy that you cannot make them up. So, in the Middle East, something rather important happens between 1950 and 1960. The State of Israel is formed. All right? The Balfour Declaration happens, State of Israel is formed, yada, yada, yada. And immediately, a lot of people that had escaped the Holocaust flee to Israel. And in Israel, there begins to be the sentiment that they were denied justice for what had happened to them. That the people that had escaped the Holocaust, Polish Jews, French Jews, German Jews, Italian Jews, and had come to Israel, had been denied their shot at justice, both because they were not present at Nuremberg. Israel literally did not exist yet. And because the crime that was committed against them was not on the list that the prosecutor brings to the judge and says, this is what we'd like to try all of these people for. And so David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, begins to have this idea of saying, well, what if we have a trial of our own? What if we sort of take the same format that Nuremberg had, and we look for a Nazi, someone who has escaped justice at Nuremberg, and we specifically try the crimes of the Holocaust that were not brought up in Nuremberg. And so they get their list of the Nazi hierarchy, and they go down the list: dead, dead, imprisoned for life, dead, suicide, dead, dead, dead. And you go down the list and say, oh, Adolf von Eichmann, alive. Public enemy number 1. We have to find Eichmann. And they don't know where he is. All they know is that he's somewhere in South America, which is a problem for them because it means he cannot be extradited. They cannot just phone up Argentina and say, yo, Argentina, give us Eichmann, because legally speaking, Argentina does not have to comply with that. So what do? They say, okay, let's get Mossad together. Mossad is the Israeli equivalent of the CIA. That's not a sound I want my sink to make. Be right back. We good. No coronavirus plumbing emergencies, which is not something I want. Anyway, what was I talking about? Mossad. So Mossad gets sent to Argentina. They get sent to look for Eichmann. And of course, Eichmann has changed his name. He's already not a big figure in the Nazi party, so not a ton of people know what he looks like. Eichmann is cursed, however, with two children that are idiots. just like not intelligent people. He has two kids, a son and a daughter. And so here's what happens. The son routinely gets completely hammered at his local, fellow children of Nazi officials bar down the street. And people can hear him bragging about how his dad is actually Adolf von Eichmann. Right? Because he gets plastered and he just tells people yeah, my dad's Eichmann. Yeah, look at me. I'm assuming that he was trying to meet girls this way, but I'm not sure that this was a good tactic. But he tried and failed. And so this immediately, Mossad hears about this, and Mossad's like, okay, we got to go to this little town. So they go to this little town, and they send the youngest Mossad agent, who's about my age, to go around the town. And he meets a pleasant young girl, and they start to have a little thing going on. And lo and behold, who is the young girl? It's Eichmann's daughter. And so when Eichmann's daughter brings her new boyfriend home, and her new boyfriend is secretly the Mossad agent, and the Mossad agent, looks at the father-in-law and looks at his notes and looks at the father-in-law, looks at his notes and says, be right back. Skedaddles back to his friends, and then they capture Eichmann. I kid you not, this is the real story of how they capture Eichmann. It's absurd. It's insane. But yes, Eichmann is captured in the middle of the night, and they tie him up, and they tie him to a chair, and they say, we think you're Adolf von Eichmann. After hours and hours and hours and hours, Eichmann confirms, yes, I am Adolf von Eichmann. So what does Mossad do? Essentially, they kidnap him. They pump him full of horse tranquilizer and put him on a plane. Imagine three of them on, coach. You have Mossad agent, Eichmann, Mossad agent, and Eichmann sleeps the whole time. And when he wakes up, lo and behold, he's in Jerusalem. And the minute he sets foot on Israeli soil as a former Nazi, he can be tried and arrested, because in Israeli law, any former Nazi that sets foot in Israel can be put on trial and arrested. And that's how they get Eichmann. Now, we're going to talk about the ethics of this in a minute, but this is how Eichmann gets to be in Israel. So they put Eichmann in prison. And they say, okay, now what? Because remember, this is not 2020. This is 1959, I believe, when they first captured him. A lot of people, for a lot of people, the Holocaust was not even 15 years before. There are people living in Israel that had survived camps, that had lost friends and family to camps. There's a lot of interest in Eichmann as a character, as a person. They want to know who the hell this guy is. They want to see the guy. And so there is that. Set of that aside, there's also the media from all over the world that want to watch this trial. And it turns out that Israel, a new country, does not have the infrastructure enough to deal with this. They don't have a courtroom that is physically large enough to accommodate all of these people. And so what happens? Well, Eichmann, similarly to what happens in the French Revolution, when the Third Estate, if you guys remember, gets kicked out of the palace, so they have to look around for a building large enough to hold them all. There was a tennis court. In this case, it's a local theater, and that's what you're seeing here. Eichmann is not tried in a courtroom. Eichmann is tried on a stage. So what they do is they have this box set up near stage right, so that Eichmann could walk on stage directly into this little box. And you can't see it, but the box actually has wheels on it so that it can be moved around as needed. And the reason for the box is, they're worried someone is going to just get up and shoot Eichmann. And so they have to put him in these sort of bulletproof panel. But it doesn't end up looking like Eichmann is the one in danger. Like, the appearance in the courtroom is that Eichmann is the dangerous criminal that needs to be boxed in, so much so that they keep 2 guards in there with him at all times. It gives the appearance of, not to use another pop culture reference, but in the beginning of Silence of the Lambs, when Clarice walks down the stairs to meet Hannibal Lecter for the first time in his glass cage, that's kind of what this looks like to the average person in that courtroom. Okay? So Eichmann finds himself on trial for a multitude of crimes. So we talked about Nuremberg extensively. We said most of the Nazis are, the senior Nazi leadership, they're tried at Nuremberg. It is a military tribunal. And that's really, really important. It's not a civilian tribunal. These are not civilian lawyers. These are army officials, army lawyers, army everything. You can actually see Ben Ferencz in this picture. He is this one right here. That's Ben Ferencz. Ferencz works for the army. He's a GI at the start of the war, but he has a law background, and so they ask him to do it because, just by virtue of, he's the only one that can, really. Most of the Nazi officials at Nuremberg are executed or jailed for life. I think there's only 2 of them that are acquitted, and that is because they had senior officials, like people above them, that are tried for the same crime, and so they're let off on technicalities, because you can't try to be 2 people for the same issue, right? So if my boss is tried for the crime that I'm accused of, then I, by definition, get set free. And this trial is ongoing all throughout the 50s, but it means that the state of Israel is not present at the Nuremberg trials. Because it's not present at the Nuremberg trial, there is this feeling among many Israeli citizens that the Jewish people were denied their shot at justice once more. And Eichmann is the last remaining high-ranking Nazi official. And so they try him. Now, being that this is a trial, Eichmann is entitled to certain rights. He's entitled to witnesses for and against. He's entitled to a lawyer to act on his behalf. And immediately, a lot of lawyers jump on this, not because Eichmann's a good guy, but because this is the trial of the century. And so lots of lawyers, just even if it's a defense, they want to get involved. And Eichmann is able to get a lawyer who's willing to do it pro bono, and to do it for the prestige, if you will. And immediately, as soon as Eichmann meets his lawyer says, and I'm paraphrasing here, my dude, you got to get off you have to argue for a mistrial. You know, if you argue for a mistrial, if you argue saying that laws were broken in the process of bringing you to trial, you will have a fighting chance of actually winning here. Because if you go that route, you are correct and you could argue for a mistrial. Eichmann refuses. Eichmann does not want to argue for a mistrial, which is odd. Eichmann insists that he is innocent. And that arguing for a mistrial would mean that he is guilty by, I want to say by definition, but like people will assume if your defense is to argue for a mistrial, people will assume that you're guilty. And Eichmann is convinced that he is not guilty. And this is one of those instances where Eichmann reveals a stunning lack of common sense, in that Eichmann is a Nazi on trial in Israel, and there is no way in hell that he was going to get a not guilty verdict. Like, I was just not on the cards. And his lawyer gets this. His lawyer understands this. Eichmann refuses. Eichmann says, I think in Eichmann, Jerusalem, he said something along the lines of, they're tarnishing the name of the Eichmann family or something along those lines, where he doesn't want to be accused of this stuff. And at the trial, lots of issues are brought up. It's more as if the Holocaust itself was on trial. And you read this in Eichmann in Jerusalem, right? When you read Eichmann in Jerusalem, it tells these stories of, Holocaust survivors being brought to the stand and telling the story of what happened to them. And Eichmann does not do himself any favors. Eichmann is a bit of an asshole to these people, for lack of better words. He says things along the lines of, rolling his eyes or smirking or saying that has nothing to do with me. He seems to view the whole exercise as a gigantic sort of waste of his time. And as much as he's doing himself in favors, in his defense, there's no smoking gun moment, right? There is no moment where someone gets on the stand and tells their story and says, it was you who did this to me. It doesn't happen, right? And, that sort of makes sense if we understand what Eichmann's job is, right? Eichmann's not a prison guard. He's not a camp director. He's not any of these things. Eichmann is the equivalent of what Eichmann's job is the head of Amtrak. Like that's what Eichmann's job is as an equivalent in the United States, right? Not the most high-ranking official in the Nazi government, and also removed enough where it is very difficult to pin anything directly on Eichmann. There is only one piece of evidence that they have, and ironically, it's a piece of evidence that you guys have read for this class before. In the minutes of the Wannsee Conference, which is what a thing we talked about in the class on the Nazis, where you got a bunch of these bureaucrats in the room, and they're all arguing for like what to do with like the financial hole that has been created, with the cost of maintaining both a war on two fronts, against the French and the Russians, and also the largest concentration camp system known to man, until Stalin comes along with the gulags. Different story. And Eichmann is at that conference. Eichmann is one of the people there. And there is a secretary who, a typist who's, taking minutes. And in the margins of their notes, of his or her notes, in the typist's notes, there is a hand-scrawled, penciled-in edition with 3 words in it. Eichmann proposes shooting. That's the evidence. That is the only thing that they have that can link Eichmann physically to the decision to engage in the Holocaust, which is, and I'll be kind here, not very legally pressing evidence, right? Like, it could be disputed, it could be, it's not on any of the other minutes, it's not present on any of the other minutes. And, I guess fun fact / humble brag moment. In the New York Public Library, they actually have the original Eichmann in Jerusalem, Hannah Arendt's drafts. And there are a couple of pages in there where, in her draft, you can sort of see that she's also debating the evidence debating the validity of the evidence here. With, more on Arendt in a minute, because oh boy, there is a reason why many devout Jewish people do not like Hannah Arendt, and we will talk about that. But the question of evidence is important, but that's not what people remember the Eichmann trial for. The Eichmann trial is perhaps most famous because Eichmann at the trial creates what we now call the Eichmann defense, namely what we now call, it was just my job. Eichmann's defense, his whole strategy is in saying that, look, running the trains was just a job that he did, that he had no real say in the larger decisions of the Nazi movement, that he was just a guy that was doing a job, and that the job did not involve him physically harming anyone. It was running facts and figures. It was just his job. Now, of course, this leads to the counterpoints of, okay, yeah, it was your job, but why did it have to be your job? Like, why did you, Adolf von Eichmann, have to do this job? You didn't have to do it. You chose to do it. You did it because of it made you feel important, so you could come home and say, yeah, I'm a big shot in the Nazi party, because the pay was good, I'm imagining. Because it's the first thing that you were good at. Lots of reasons. And we can get into, there is a reason why the character of Adolf von Eichmann is studied in law classes, history classes, and poli-sci classes, in psychology classes, because this guy is a weird mishmash of a wide variety of topics of discussion. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to recap some arguments in Eichmann's defense and recap some arguments against Eichmann. Arguments that could be said, yeah, Eichmann, you're definitely guilty, or no, Eichmann, you're definitely innocent. So here's arguments for Eichmann. Eichmann's defense. The circumstances of how Eichmann gets to be in that trial, on that stage, they are suspicious, if not actively illegal and wrong. And so it is, I think, fair to say that had Eichmann argued for a mistrial, he would have, I don't want to say likely, because I don't like playing historical guessing games, but it is definitely possible that Eichmann would have gone off and said, okay, yes, judge saying, we screwed up. Yes, you're right. Mistrial, go free. That actually leads rather nicely to my second point, in that there was no way in hell that Eichmann was going to receive not guilty, which is like a cornerstone of how trials should work, right? Literally written in our courtrooms is the phrase, innocent until proven guilty, right? And that there's a presumption of innocence that people get when entering the courtroom. But because of the political and social pressures, and because of who Eichmann is, there is no way that there could ever be a presumption of innocence. Eichmann was guilty by default, essentially, which is, I don't want to say that that's a bad thing, but it's definitely an argument in Eichmann's favor, because Eichmann can say, well, this is a show trial. This is no. Those of you who did the extra credit, this is no different than the trial that they gave Barry at the end of Death of Stalin. He could have made that argument for sure. Another argument that could be made is that Eichmann's role in the Nazi Party is, at the end of the day, for as much as he likes to hype it up and like, oh yeah, big shot Adolf von Eichmann, his job is minor. Like, yeah, he works in the government, but he's not a decision maker. He's a bureaucrat, right? He definitely gets told what to do and not tell people what to do, which means that, bureaucrats, by their definition, really, don't get a lot of say in what they're told to do. We didn't bring this up, but this is, I think, rather important as well, that there are penalties for going against the Nazis, right? Had Eichmann decided to be a conscientious objector, he would have likely been executed on the spot or joined those same Jews on his own trains, ironically. And so, there is no taking no for an answer in Nazism, which means that I don't say this for you to feel sympathy for Eichmann. These are just, had Eichmann brought these points up instead of being a grade A prick during the trial, he could have maybe argued for a mistrial. And again, we did talk about this, that there's very, 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 very little evidence used at the trial that implicates Eichmann directly and personally. They're not trying Eichmann so much as they're putting the Holocaust itself on trial, and Eichmann is just the last remaining figurehead of that event, those series of events, that tragedy. Eichmann being the last remaining high-ranking Nazi official, he's just the guy who is there. Here's some arguments against Eichmann that also bear saying. Until the day he dies, not to spoil how this ends, but like, come on, all right? They kill him. He is an unrepentant Nazi. By contrast, right, the guy we've been using as stereotypical proto-Nazi, Ernst Jünger, is a repentant Nazi. Eichmann, on the other hand, does not repent the actions of the Nazi Party at all. He refuses to disavow them. There is no moment in which he says, I am so sorry that this happened to you. I'm so sorry about my role in it. At the end of the day, I was a prisoner of the circumstances, and I did what I could to survive, but I'm so sorry for what happened. That never happens during the trial. He never disavows his own actions, or more importantly, the actions of the party. He never has the moment where he says, I'm innocent, but these other guys are guilty of sin. No. He doesn't say anything bad about them either. His arguments are, I may be guilty in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of man, you must let me free. Those are his arguments. He doesn't even feel bad about what he has done. Eichmann is also really important in the functioning of the camp system, right? The irony is that Eichmann being so good at his job is part of the reason why so many people died, right? Getting people from the cities to the camps is not a nothing job. It's an important cog in that machine. And so Eichmann being so good at that means that more people died because of his actions. He has a major role in ensuring that the camp system is as deadly as it ends up being. At no point number 3, does Eichmann have that moment of, what have I become? What am I doing? He doesn't try to save anyone or slow down or sabotage from within. There is no moment where Eichmann has the "oh shit, I'm a monster" mentality. He puts his head down, stays quiet, does what he's told without question. It's just my job. And these are two broader points, but again, deserve mentioning. Israel through nobody's fault. To be clear, right? It's no one's fault that Israel is denied a chance at justice. But the fact is they were. And so it's not so much that they want Eichmann, it's that Eichmann is the last remaining person, so he inherits the responsibility down the chain of command. And lastly, Eichmann is at the Wannsee conference. And even if it's minor input, he does have input in the decision to implement the final solution. Like when people are starting to say, oh, we might have to kill all these people to cut our costs. At no point does Eichmann say, oh, how dare we, and storms out. No. Eichmann engages in the discussion. He engages and he participates and he says, oh, well, we could do this or do this other thing. Right? At no point does Eichmann have the moral qualm of saying, maybe this is wrong. And I think that that's sort of the issue. Now, if you wanted to boil down the arguments for and against, broadly speaking, they can be summarized as a difference between prioritizing just procedures or just outcomes. So I want to hear from people in the chat. You know, mic's on, vid's on. I mean it. Put them on. And YouTube chat, I want to have you guys open as well. Okay. Let's talk Eichmann. Because what would you guys do if you were the prosecutor? If you no, there is no judge. You are the judge. What would you do to this guy?
I don't know, honestly.
You don't know? What do you mean?
Well, because I don't know, like, you know, through the book, I never got the impression that he's guilty, right? But not of necessarily the charges. That's the impression I got.
So what's he guilty of then?
I mean, being a monster. You know,
that's not a crime, though, is it?
Yeah.
Like the crime of being an asshole is not a crime.
Yeah.
Someone else, come on, help him out. I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong answer here. I still don't know. I've been teaching this for years now, and I still don't know what the right answer is. Thoughts?
I mean, I guess like imprisonment because he was involved with the Nazis and did do he didn't physically kill a Jew, but he did aid in it, which I feel like is unethical in itself because you technically know what you're doing. It's not like he didn't know what he was doing.
All right. So let me paint you a different picture here. Let's say, since you talked, McGanna, do you have an ex you hate?
No.
No? Okay, let's say you do. All right. And let's say Patrick is an Uber driver. And let's say, McGanna, you call an Uber, and Patrick is your Uber driver, and you get in your Uber, and you go to your ex's house, and you commit bloody murder.
Mm-hmm.
Is Patrick guilty for having driven you there?
If I know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, of course. Let's not ask Patrick, the guy who would be sent to prison. But
in that
seriously,
sense, no, because he had no idea what I was even doing there in the first place.
okay. So how much does Eichmann actually know?
I don't know.
It's not clear, is it? Right? I mean, Eichmann claims ignorance, but he is also at the conference where this is decided. That said, I watch you guys in class. And I know that just because you're there doesn't mean you're paying attention. So, you know, it doesn't really just doesn't mean anything. I also want to point out that on YouTube, Gabe says it's a tough one, but I would have probably put him to death. The court would have had to face the backlash if they didn't. The book highlighted this point. Yes, it does. The judges were the only one who believed in justice the right way versus everyone who wanted revenge and a scapegoat to all the horrible crime. Well, this goes back to the idea of it was literally impossible for Eichmann to get not guilty. Right? There was no way that Eichmann was going to leave that courtroom a free man. Or let me rephrase, there was no way that Eichmann was going to leave that courtroom alive because guilty means they kill you. So, you know, there is a reason why this is like one of the big sort of ethical questions of the 20th century, because if we agree that Eichmann is a monster, does someone like Eichmann still deserve the basic ideas of a fair trial? Even if it means that, like, we have to be on some level okay with the fact that Eichmann goes free.
Yeah, I think so.
So you would acquit him, you're saying? It's the opposite of what you said before.
No, I said it's a, you know, it's hard to say because I'm not in that position, you know, and I
Right.
don't that I ever would be. But you know, like I personally would, you know, I'd rather see justice carried out. You know,
Okay, but what is justice here?
well, I mean, if you have a code of laws and you say you're going to try someone by them, then I feel like you should.
Who haven't I heard from? Ibn, I haven't heard from you yet. What do you think?
I feel like he's guilty because he know enough to know that it's not the right thing to do.
You're saying even if he doesn't know exactly what's going on in the camps, he's not stupid, right?
Yeah.
And he knows that there's no, like, these are all one-way trips, or at least that the trains are not coming back full.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, look, again, I wish I had a nice answer that I could give you, that I could put a nice little bow on it and say, yeah, this is the right answer. Here you go. I don't. I really don't. I don't think anyone does. I think this is one of those really, really, really difficult questions. Here's what I will say, though. I have a couple other things that need to say. We need to talk about the conclusion of the book because that's messed up. But we also need to talk about the filming of the trial and about how this trial is somewhat more relevant than you realize. So I think a couple of you know this. I am not a full-time faculty. I'm an adjunct. I'm essentially the part-time version of a professor. So this is not really my full job. Well, it is now because of coronavirus, but when it's normal times, I work in campaign politics. I work for the Democratic Party. And in 2016, I met a couple of undersecretaries in the Obama White House that had come back to New Jersey, and they come back to spend the time over the summer with the families before campaigning started up again. And, you know, I don't remember quite how we started talking about Eichmann. I think it's because I was prepping this lecture for the first time. And they told me, yeah, by the way, we actually had to read Eichmann in Jerusalem in preparation for the bin Laden raid. Now you might be asking why? Well, because if bin Laden is captured and is brought to New York, you run into many of the same problems that Eichmann in Jerusalem has. You bring bin Laden to New York. Is there any chance he's getting a not guilty? No, there isn't, right? There's no like shot at this guy is leaving this courtroom alive, right? Getting him to New York City would have been a difficult proposition of itself, because it is essentially the same thing, right? Afghanistan and Pakistan don't have extradition with the United States, and we've gone there and essentially Eichmann bin Laden, right? We've kidnapped him, we put him on a plane, we brought him to New York. It's quite literally a very similar thing. And so apparently the Obama White House, like they were reading Eichmann in Jerusalem as they prepped for it, and they solved the problem by just shooting him and dumping him overboard, which is, I guess, one way to deal with the problem. But true story. This is something that they read in preparation for that raid, in terms of like how do we deal with it, which is why the SEAL Team 6 had kill, not capture orders. They were there to kill bin Laden, not capture him. This is the reason. Couple more things. Now, those of you doing the extra credit, this is going to be a little more relevant to you. But part of the interesting thing about the Eichmann trial is that this is not just a trial that is live. It's also live on television. And this is like the first, you have to think, this is now 1960. For the first time, all over the world, people have this little porthole in their living room that helps them understand the world. And that little porthole is their television. And the Eichmann trial is intentionally filmed as a documentary series. Now you might be asking, why would you film this as a documentary series? Well, here's the thing. It's a bit of a disturbing thing. The Holocaust is something that I feel comfortable sort of not getting into the details as much as I should, because pop culture treats it so comprehensively. But that was not always the case. In fact, in the early part of the 1950s and 60s, a lot of people were not aware that the Holocaust had happened at all. The Holocaust, they thought that the Holocaust was a fiction, it was a lie, that it was something that had been made up, essentially. In the eyes of many people, there is no way the Nazis could have done this and gotten away with it. And after all, Nuremberg, they don't find that this had happened. So why should we believe you? Especially in this part of the country, in this part of the world, where so many Jews flee Germany and flee the Holocaust and come here and tell the stories, people don't believe them. They say, oh, that's not true. Oh, how can that be true? There is no way. What are you talking about? The only time that people realize that this is a true story is because the Eichmann trial is filmed and put on television every night at 9. It's treated like the Super Bowl almost. Like people get around their TV and they're not watching, the Falcons or the Patriots. They're watching Eichmann being tried for the crime of genocide. And this is like really important, because chances are, if you have parents, or more likely in your case, grandparents, that were alive during the 1960s, chances are this trial, this lecture that I just gave, is how they learned about the Holocaust. Because they turned on their TV and they watched Eichmann be put on trial, and they watched the evidence be brought against him on trial. They brought the film from the camps, and the video evidence, and the film evidence, the pictures of the unearthing of mass graves done with tractors and bodies being hauled onto each other, some horrific stuff that people either refuse or just not allow themselves to believe until the Eichmann trial shows up. And that's really important, because most people did not know about the Holocaust until this event. And so before we get into Arendt's rather disturbing conclusions, I think like my sort of extra non-credit, just extra assignment for you guys is call Nana, call Pop, call your grandparents and say, hey, I don't want to ask how you're doing. I want to ask about the Holocaust. You know, unless your grandparents are Jewish and were there, but most likely, if they had a television, this is how they learned about it, which is just crazy to me. You know, send them a message, send them, do what you got to do. But it's one of, we're getting to the point of the class, especially in Unit 4, where the history stops feeling historical and starts feeling present, because the history that we will talk about is going to start happening in the lives of people we care about, if not our own lives. And so it's going to stop feeling like history rather quickly. Now, let's talk about Arendt's conclusion. So I'm going to stop share screen here, if I can do that. Zoom, come on, Zoom, work with me. Exit Keynote, here we go. Attaboy, okay. So let's talk Arendt's conclusion, because Arendt has a pretty messed up conclusion to Eichmann in Jerusalem, which we would be remiss if we did not talk about. Eichmann in Jerusalem ends with Arendt looking closely at the man of Eichmann. And I think the words she uses is that he's fundamentally unimpressive, that he is just not even an average Joe, because average Joe have redeeming qualities. This is not that. He is fundamentally, in every way, shape, or form, not someone that we would consider to be, let's say, a master, not an evil genius, right? So when Arendt looks, you know, Arendt is in Jerusalem. Like she writes the book Eichmann in Jerusalem as a book sort of follow-up to an article that she writes for the New Yorker. And in Eichmann in Jerusalem, Arendt looks at the character of Eichmann and says, as a Jewish person herself, and she says, look, this is the guy that we let take us to slaughter. We, you know, millions and millions and millions of us got brought to our deaths by this guy. Are we serious? This is the guy. Not evil genius, not you know, super smart mastermind of the dark arts or whatever you want to call it. No. Adolf von Eichmann, guy who failed at everything. This is the guy that we let kill us all. And she asks perhaps the most controversial question of modern literature, which is, as a Jewish person, how much of this is our fault? Eichmann in Jerusalem ends with Arendt on some level blaming the Jews for their own Holocaust. Not so much because they physically did it, but because she says, look, Hitler made no secrets about what he was going to do. He gave you an out. Why didn't you take it? He said he was going to kill you all, and then shock all, he killed you all. This is Arendt's conclusion. And he says, look, the fact that we let our, I'm speaking as Arendt, you know, that we let ourselves be brought to slaughter by this guy is frankly insulting. And she says, essentially, that the Jews of Germany bear some culpability for their own Holocaust. And this is why Hannah Arendt is one of the most detested authors in Jewish circles. I had a student once who told me that in her house, the name Arendt is used as an insult, like as a synonym for traitor, essentially, or Judas. They use Arendt. in that household. And so let's talk about that conclusion, because that's a doozy of a way to end Eichmann in Jerusalem. What do we think of that?
Very spicy.
Very spicy. Okay. Any hot takes? Bear in mind that you're live streaming to YouTube right now, so don't say shit that will like preclude you from future employment. He's immediately hiding his face. No, but like, this is one of the most controversial books of history for a reason. And this is, I didn't want to say it in class, but like, this is why everybody reads Eichmann in Jerusalem. It's not because it's the best book on Eichmann. It's not. It's not because it is the most comprehensive book on the Eichmann trial. It's not. It is quite literally because of this doozy of a conclusion that Hannah Arendt makes. On what level is it true?
So, all right, so I'll bite. All right, so this kind of ties back to the whole trial for me.
Right.
That this is why I think that you're in between a rock and a hard place, because in the sense that, I mean, she talks about how many of the Jews wrote the lists. They were the ones who said, hey, these guys, these are the Jews. This is where their property is. This is where their money is. So not in the direct sense, like, yeah, you guys are to blame. Obviously, they're not to blame. They wouldn't have done it.
She never says specifically, you guys are to blame.
Yeah. So like, not in that
shares
sense.
the burden, I think was the language she uses.
Like, I wouldn't say they share the burden, but there's this, and I don't want to say like I don't want to say that they're culpable at all, because it's like pretty ugly, but in the sense that a lot of the things that happen were only able to happen because of what's the word I'm looking for? Not collaboration. Collaborators, somewhat.
So
makes sense?
the equivalent that I make is, I'm going to say, okay, let's say, it's the internet. You get a creepy message. Someone slides into your DMs at like 3 a.m. and says, TikTok. Okay, no, better. Let's do pop culture. Who's watched The Ring? I'm one of those people that thinks a litany of pop culture references is a good substitute for a personality. You're right. What is the signature tagline of The Ring, like the horror movie? You put the tape in, and what does it say? What's going to happen to you? In how many days?
7 days?
7 days, right? Tamara is going to crawl out of your TV and murder you. Okay, fine. If after 7 days, you're still watching Netflix on your TV, on what level is it on you? Like, if after those 7 days, you're still in your house and not like in a cabin in the woods, far away from any electronics, on to what degree is like, okay, yes, she killed you, but she also told you she was, and you did not do anything about it. Like, I don't want to defend Arendt's point, because I don't agree with Arendt's point, but I think that ironically, Arendt's point simplified, and if you remove like the emotive, understandably like emotive nature of the subject matter, you just look at it as, while it is not your fault, you also did yourself no favors. I think that that's not incorrect necessarily. At least it's not an incorrect way of viewing it. Now, personally, I don't agree with it. I'm flat out. I think it is an exercise in victim blaming. But I find it fascinating that it is not Whitey McWhiteface, Arian McArian that's making this point. It's Hannah Arendt, someone who had escaped Germany and had gone to go teach at NYU. I think she'd also did she also teach? I think she also may have taught a couple classes at Rutgers, but I may be wrong. No, Princeton. Sorry, Princeton. But yes, this is someone who knows. This is not an. If anything, I feel like she's not. Like, I find this argument surprising coming from Hannah Arendt of all people. But it is a remarkably disturbing conclusion. And again, this is why, at least in college, like, everyone reads Eichmann in Jerusalem. Like, this is the reason. The reason is, like, it's a heavy book, figuratively and literally, talking about a topic and in a way that people don't often like to hear. But I think that's what makes it important. So, just to recap what's going on the 22nd, McGenna, you're in my extra credit. It's the 22nd, right? For extra credit?
Yeah.
Yes. Extra credit is watching the Eichmann Show on Netflix, which I would highly advise that you all watch as well, because that is a movie about how the Eichmann trial is filmed. It is, imagine if Eichmann in Jerusalem met, oh God, what's that show on HBO? Jeff Daniels, West Wing guy, The Newsroom, right? It's a show about the producers of the Eichmann Show. It's really, really good. And it's solid movie. And if you haven't, even if you're not doing it for the extra credit, watch it. It's 10 out of 10 recommend. Martin Freeman is in it, is the lead. So not a nobody. Then on Thursday, we will be entering Unit 4 and we'll be talking about the Cold War. I mentioned this at the start of class, but it bears repeating. If you have not started your final, start. If you have, not even considered like what questions you're going to answer, start. Because we have less than 20 days, I believe, until they're due. It's not a ton of time for 10 pages. So this is your, like, I'm giving you permission to panic and to get started. All right. So I want to make sure that I have all my talking points. Answer that. Yes. Answer that. Yes. Yes. Okay. Did everything I need to talk about. All right. Guys, as always, pleasure. And I will talk to you guys on Wednesday/Thursday. All right. Any questions?
For the final, was just a cite of the sources that we used, or?
Oh yes. Okay. On Thursday, I am going to do, after the lecture, and I'm probably going to have to like end the stream on YouTube and then restart it so it can be like same group of people but different crowd, like different YouTube video. I'm going to do a, here's how you use Word to do your citations. Okay. Once you learn how to use it, it's easy. It's like simple. All right?
Okay.
No more questions? But remind me, please, because I will forget.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. All right. On that note, I will end it here. I am going to start office hours. I know I have to talk to Ibn afterwards. So guys, why don't you guys clear out while I end the YouTube stream? Okay? All right. Bye.